I know for me, one of the skills that I am most interested in helping my kids learn is problem solving. That's something I'm really passionate about for moms. And it's also something I'm really passionate about for my kids because I know that if they have this one skill, that they will be able to face all of the challenges that come their way and be able to feel confident as individuals, as humans, as adults, and as children, learning how to identify what really needs to happen and how to move forward. And we can use these skills of problem solving and develop these skills of problem solving in many domains. And so today I'm really excited to have Linsey Jensen here with us. She's going to talk about 3 specific principles that really help our kids develop the skill of problem solving and uses examples from how it applies in science, or how it applies in homework, or how it applies in teaching them life skills like cleaning their rooms or wiping off the table. So there's something here for everyone today, and thank you for joining us, and let's jump into the conversation.
Hi, I'm Jessica Jackson, and this is the new way to thrive in motherhood by leaning into who you are, what you love, your unique family situation, and personal mission to create a life that you actually want to live. I want to invite you to join me in saying no to the life of the exhausted supermom, burnout, victim thinking, being pulled in so many directions, suffering through survival mode, or being lost in motherhood, and say yes to building strong families and moving forward on our greatest goals in order to create a fulfilling life that we are excited to wake up to each day and become a soaring mother. This is the Thriving in Motherhood podcast.
If you love today's episode, I want to invite you to sign up for the Surviving to Thriving Toolkit waitlist. This is the program and process that I've developed to help you walk through the 5-step path from surviving to thriving and be able to identify what problems that you need to solve in your own life at the right time and in the right way so that you can feel empowered and start thriving and not just feel like you are stuck in the endless onslaught and never-ending treadmill of problems and needs and people wanting you to do things, and instead learn how to take a driver's seat in the situation and your life and be able to do the things that you need to do, but also the things that you want to do, the things that you really care about, and not neglecting those things that really matter most to you, like your family and taking care of your home and whatever is unique to you in your situation. So again, you can find that at survivingtothrivingtoolkit.com and join the waitlist so you can be the first to know when the doors open for the toolkit again. Welcome to the Thriving in Motherhood podcast. Today I'm here with Linsey Jensen. Welcome, Linsey.
Thanks for having me.
So Linsey's actually been here before. She was on episode 20, way back when the podcast was just getting started, and our lives have evolved a lot since then. So Linsey, how about you start out by just telling us what motherhood looks like for you right now?
So for me right now, I homeschool. I have 4 children. They're actually all girls. My oldest is 11, down to 4. She's turning 5 this week. We live in Idaho. We love it. We've lived here for the last coming on 2 years about. But yeah, I homeschool my kids. I stay at home. I have my side business on the side where I make circuit kits and escape rooms and all the things. We'll get into it. I kind of do a little bit of everything.
Yeah. And so one of the things that's been really fun, Linsey and I became friends back when our husbands were in grad school. And actually, Linsey was also in grad school at the time for her getting her master's in science education.
Science education. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so one of the wonderful things for all of us moms that were grad school wives at the time was we had no money, but we had Linsey. And so she would do things like do escape rooms for us. We'd all go do a Harry Potter escape room or a birthday party escape room, or she'd come up with activities for our kids. And so, and she's continued to do that, like providing wonderful resources for now that we don't live close to each other that she ships to my home and I can do with my kids, whether they're escape rooms or these circuit whiz kits that you've created or little 3D printed animals. There's just like a wide variety of things that you do. But what I love most about what you do and what we're going to talk about today is it's not just stuff and it's not just keeping kids busy. There's like very intentional thought going into everything that you have created and designed for families. So how about you share a little bit with us how you kind of became this expert in problem solving and game design, and then we'll jump into the principles that we can use as moms in our own home.
Sure. No, that's a great question. So yeah, my background's in physics. I got my bachelor's degree in physics. That's where my husband and I met. And he was actually a physics major. And then we went to Indiana to Purdue where we met you. And I got my master's in education. My husband got his PhD in physics. Um, you say that I did a lot. I feel the same about you and our group. It was just a really special time where everyone had such unique talents that somehow it just really amazing things came out of it. Um, but yeah, because of that, I just have always, I don't know, limited time, limited money. I've always been very intentional about what do we care most about? What are we wanting to put our time and our energy? I think you're the same way. That's what makes your podcast so resonate with so many people. Um, but yeah, that's where it got started. Is that background in physics. So when we were in grad school, this is the long story. I started making escape rooms to celebrate my husband's birthday. He was turning 30. We wanted to do something big. And so we had you over for the escape rooms, and then those kind of grew. And then I started making religious themed ones. And then I started teaching about how to teach religious things. And then I backed away from that, went back to my science background because that's, anyway, really where my favorite topics are. But what's been so interesting is how all of these things relate to problem solving. So, for example, from a science perspective, one of the things that was so frustrating for me so now I'm homeschooling my kids, and so maybe I'll start here actually. I was looking for a science curriculum for my kids to use this year because yes, well, I could make it. I'm making so many things and I didn't want to. And related to that, we were also going to do biology. My background's physics, so I'm way better at the physics than at the biology. And I was looking for different curriculums to use, and I had just a couple criteria. One, I didn't necessarily want it to come from a religious background, even though I am religious, and I think I wanted one that taught what is kind of traditionally taught in schools so that I could then communicate with my kids and we could have these discussions and they could learn to problem solve and think critically. And then two, I wanted them to be involved and them to do it. And I've been very frustrated with all the things I found because they're very prescriptive. They tell kids what to do and they tell, here's how you do, like, here's the experiment, follow this experiment, do all these things. And it's really hard for me to see that because that's not what science is about, right? It's the whole point of science and engineering or technology, any of that stuff is this problem solving idea. And even though like now I don't necessarily do something with my physics degree in the workplace, this thought of problem solving, these ideas of how do I solve these problems at home? That's what moms do all the time, right? We can each come up with so many ideas of how we face these problems and then we have to overcome and kind of figure out how that works. So kind of all the different ways that I've tied it in that, yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, that's a little bit more about my background and how I got here.
Yeah, I love that. And so, well, and like, you mean this to the core. Like we came and visited you on a road trip in New Mexico and you and your husband are doing like this advanced puzzle game together in the evenings after you put the kids to bed. Like you just like you live, breathe and eat this stuff and know it really well. And you've taken courses in game design. And so you just have such an interesting combination of really truly understanding both science principles and what it takes to teach science well, as well as what does it take to make games interesting so that people enjoy them of all kinds. And then you tie in this, you're a parent and you've learned a lot about how to teach kids well and how to get them engaged in their learning. And so you've created like kind of these three areas that come together and make you really an expert in teaching kids problem solving.
Couple examples from recently in my life.
Yeah.
In a couple different spheres of life, right? So one from a maybe a more technical point of view. So I was at a science conference with my kids. I took them to a women in science conference down in Utah. And we were on our way back and we were traveling up the freeway. We're just on the freeway. We just crossed the state and my kids in the back, they're like, oh, how much longer do we have? Right? How much? Right? I'm sure we can all relate to this. Oh, like, when are we going to get there? And having just taught the stuff about how to teach problem solving was on my mind, which sometimes is a good thing. But it was, I asked them, I says, okay, well, let's look and let's see, where are we at on the freeway? Let's look for a mile marker. And so they look and they're like, oh, we're at 249. I was like, oh, awesome. What exit do we live off of? And they're like, oh, we live off of 208. And I was like, okay, so how how long until we get there? How far do we have to go? And they're like figuring it out. It's like, oh, we have 41 miles left. I'm like, excellent. But now we just passed mile marker 248, right? It took some time. So now we have 40 miles left. On this section of the freeway, we're going 80 miles an hour. Like, how long until we get there? And my second grader, she's like figuring it out. And she's like, oh, well, 40 miles is half of 80. So we'll get there in half an hour. And all of a sudden it went from, oh, when are we going to get there to, wait, my brain's engaged. I'm figuring this out. Now I have something to do. I'm not bored, number one. And number two, they now have the tools to figure out how long until they get there on their own, right? So that they don't have to keep bugging me. So that's just like a really small, simple example of like how, what it looks like in our day to day. And I think that that's kind of a critical point of where it all of a sudden they're engaged. They go from bored to engaged. And that's one of the reasons I love problem solving, because all of us are, right? If we're just sitting there and someone's talking to us in lectures, like this is me all the time. I fall asleep way too easy when I'm not engaged, when I'm not trying to solve something or problem solving. I can't just listen. Anyway, so that's an example from like the math perspective. Here's one from my personal life, just not even related to any of that. But a couple months back, I went to a homeschool conference, and I was gone overnight, and my husband stayed with the kids, and I came back and we were talking, and I was getting after the kids for something, saying, okay, you have to, like, let's finish cleaning up or something. I don't remember. And my husband just kind of made the comment to me. He says, Linsey, things were a little bit calmer when you were gone. I was like, well, and my initial reaction was, well, yeah, because there wasn't as high expectations, because like you didn't care what they did, right? Like that was my initial kind of gut reaction. But I was thinking about it after, and I realized, no, okay, there's a problem here. And I've known this about myself sometimes too, like that I will get angry or frustrated with children more than I want to, right? And I was thinking about this more from an objective problem solving type point of view, and was realizing, okay, part of the reason that I feel the need to get mad or to get frustrated with what my children are doing is because that's the only consequence they have. And once I realized that because I'm homeschooling, because there's not the natural consequence of not getting your homework done, like that, you get zeros on a test or whatever, like it's not, some of those built-in consequences aren't there. And the only consequence they have is, the only thing that happens if they don't do their job is that mom gets frustrated. And so anyway, after a few days having processed this, I explained to my husband, I says, okay, well, here's what's going on. And so together we were able to kind of come up with some different ways. Okay, what's some other ways we can hold them accountable so that I don't feel the need to get mad all the time? And so that was, we're still trying to figure it out. We have some things that are working, some things that haven't worked, but that idea of, okay, let's look at this objectively. What are we actually trying to do? What are the real problems we're trying to solve? Why is this the way that it's happening? And what can we do to fix it? I think is a really powerful idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go now and talk about your principles, because I think your stories have illustrated things. So let's dive deeper now and see what's happening behind the scenes.
So the principles I like to talk about. So maybe just a little bit and talk about games for a minute. So I love games. I think most people love games. Lots of our kids love games, right? Board games, video games, escape room games, any of those types of things, playground games. So like you mentioned, I've dived into a little bit of game design. And one of the things that's actually really interesting discussion is what constitutes a game, right? What even makes something a game? And the idea is that, games can be with other people. They can be by themselves. It can be with physical things, or it might just be a mind game. But whatever it is, you're always trying to problem solve. It's a problem solving activity with done with a playful attitude. That's what they say. So that those two components is what defines a game. And if you think of a video game, like if you're playing Mario, right, you're trying to defeat Bowser or save Princess Peach from Bowser. And then so you're playing a game to try to figure that out, right? Or if you're playing chess, well, I'm trying to checkmate your king before you can capture my king. If we're playing tag, I'm going to try to avoid getting tagged, right? And all of these things are problem solving things that we can do. So with that in mind, then the first principle is that, well, let me back up just one more second. So, and in each of those examples, there's a very real possibility of loss, of losing, right? So in all of those examples, you can win and you can lose, right? You can checkmate my king before I checkmate yours. I can get tagged no matter how hard I'm trying. If I'm doing an escape room, it is possible that I don't make it out of the room in time, right? In all of these situations, it's possible to lose. But what makes that so fun is, on the other hand, it's also possible for me to win. And if I win, then I know it's because of what I did, right? Because it is possible for me to lose. I then become the hero. And that's principle number one, is that it's about making kids the heroes of their own experience, of their own journey, right? Anytime that they are the ones that feel like they did something, like they were the hero, like that's principle one. So I'll give you another example. Toddlers are really, really good at this, right? We think as a parent, as a good parent, I'm going to take my toddler to the zoo and I'm going to have this really great experience and I'm going to do this really cool thing and we're going to go to the zoo and it's going to be awesome for my toddler, right? For her. And so I'll get the lunch packed and I'll get the diaper bag in the car and I'll get the stroller in the car. And then, okay. And so now we're finally ready to go. And I said, okay, can you go put your shoes, or let's get your shoes. And I go to help her put her shoes on and she'll say, no, me do it. Right. And so then I have to sit there and wait and wait and wait, because it's going to take her 5 minutes to get her shoes on. Finally, she gets her shoes on and then we say, okay, let's go get in the car. And I go to buckle her and she says, no, me do it. Right. And she wants to buckle herself. And we've all experienced this. And so now we're 20 minutes late for this really cool experience that we wanted to have. And what we're missing, what the toddler knows inherently, is that the toddler's goal, her goal in life, is to become a competent human being. Right. Her goal right now is not actually to go to the zoo, although that will be fun. She understands that she wants to become a competent, useful human being. And when we then take away that opportunity and put on her shoes and buckle her up because we want to take you to the zoo, that's the cool experience, we're forgetting that, no, actually what our toddler needs is to become a competent human being. And that requires her putting on her own shoes. And when she can do that and she buckles herself up, that joy is legitimate. Right? She knows that, hey, I'm like mom, I can put on my own shoes. Anyway, so that would be an example where but the point is that we have to remember that we want the kids to be the hero, right? We're not the hero in this place. So if I can give a science example, for example, for a minute, when I was at Utah State and I was president of the physics club, and we're going to do so cool things and we're going to go and get lots of people excited about science, right? That was our goal, was to go get lots of kids excited about science. And so we'd go to elementary schools and we would bring our liquid nitrogen and we would, freeze things and we'd smash them and we'd blow them up. And we had our Van de Graaff machine that made your hair stand up on end. And we thought we were so cool. And it was cool. But what I didn't realize then that I know now is that by me showing it off, it's kind of like a basketball player coming and saying, hey, look at how cool basketball is. And he dunks the basketball. And no matter how often he dunks that basketball, it's never going to make me think, oh, I can do that. I can go dunk that basketball. Right. And so this idea of, of problem solving, or of helping the kids be the hero, they have to see themselves in that role. They have to see what they can do. It's not about showing them, look at how cool this basketball is. Look at how cool science is. Look at how cool, books are. Like, they have to be the ones doing the reading, doing the figuring out. Like, that's principle number one, right? And if you think of games, right, that's the whole point, is that they're the ones doing it. If I were to stand behind you and say, okay, move your queen over here, now move your knight over here, it loses the joy. And you don't feel any accomplishment for having won if I have to tell you every step.
Oh yeah, my almost 5-year-old's right there, where for a long time she's been on my team. And now if I suggest anything, she's like, that's not what I was going to do. We cannot do it that way. It is my choice. And even if she's going to lose horribly, she doesn't care. It has to be hers. She has to own it. How do we destroy this for our bigger kids? Like, get in the way, like, how do we get in the way of them being the hero in their own story when it comes to their own things that they're working on?
Sure. I think the biggest thing, and this is me too, is we focus so much on the result rather than the process, right? We think, okay, no, look, I want you, going back to Mario, for example, I want you to touch the flag at the end, right? So look, jump now, hop over that biting frog or the biting flower, right? And instead, so this actually leads into principle 2, really well, which is principle 2 is it's about discovery over directions. And so I think and science does this all the time too, where you get a science kit and they're like, okay, look, you can make this light bulb light up, connect all these pieces together, and then look, you did it. That's so cool, right? Or you get a science experiment book and it tells you step by step, here's all the things you need to do. Look, you're amazing. Look like you're so cool. But by giving those directions, instead of letting the kids figure it out, we're focused. The problem is that our focus is on the end and having that, making your hair stand up. That's the goal. Instead of saying, no, I want you to understand electricity so that you can see, like, look at you can figure out some of these cool things you can do, right? I want you to understand how to play this game so that you can feel that excitement of getting there at the end. Right. And so I think that's a big point is rather than focusing on the end goal, it's letting them focus on that discovery and figuring it out themselves.
Well, but I also feel like it's so natural to jump in and be like, oh, don't make the mistake. Like, why do we do that as parents? Why do we like jump in so quickly?
Well, I mean, so that's exactly right, right? It's so easy to say, like, let them fail until they're about to fail, right? So for example, I noticed this the other day I asked my 7-year-old to wipe off the table. And I see her go to wipe the table and she's like wiping all the stuff onto the ground, right? And she's smearing milk around instead of like actually taking it off the table. And like I feel my heartbeat start to rise and I'm like, no, like just this is how you wipe. That's what you're asking. So sometimes I have to walk away. But there's this really interesting study that I'll tell you about that I was reading where they studied these kids taking a math test, and it was a hard math test. And they were measuring the stress levels of the kids. And the stress, as the kids are taking this math test and they're trying to figure it out, and their stress levels are, it's not that it's non-existent because it's there, but it's also manageable, right? Like they're working towards it. And so they're kind of figuring out and it's okay. And they might be making some mistakes or whatever. Anyway, they also are measuring at the same time the stress levels of the parents, of the mom watching her child take this test and screwing it up. And what they noticed, and you've probably felt this, is our stress levels start to rise as we start seeing them make all these mistakes and doing it wrong and they can't figure it out. Oh, you're really struggling. Like we want to jump in. And the moment that that the parents would jump in to help their kid, their stress levels dropped. And so I think you asked why, like it's because our own stress levels are going up. And the moment that we are now working towards solving a problem, our stress levels drop and we think because that's what humans are designed to do. But the problem with that, the other side, is that the moment the parents stepped in, the kids' stress levels spiked because they're no longer the ones working towards that problem. They are now the ones being told, no, you're not good enough. Like, I have to solve this for you. You can't figure it out. And they're no longer working towards solving that problem. They feel stuck. And so the only thing they can do is worry and their stress levels rise. And so I think that the reason why we do it is because our stress levels are rising. Like that's a legitimate cortisol is pumping through our veins. But what we have to remember is that we're the adult and we can handle the stress and we have to let them work through it. Right. So the other part of that, though, is that doesn't mean we don't have expectations for our kids. So what I had to do with my daughter was be like, okay, I expect a clean table and I expect the floor around it to be clean, at least as clean as it was before. So if you're dropping stuff onto the floor, like all of this needs cleaned up. Then I walked away and let her do it however she wanted to do it with certain expectations very clear. Right. And so that's anyway, that's kind of just a little interesting story about that.
No, I love that example so much. I was reading Understood Betsy with my kids maybe like a year ago. I think it's one of like the Ambleside Online recommended books.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, this girl goes from a household of being just like babied, honestly. Like she had no
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. She didn't know she could do anything. And all of a sudden she goes to live on a farm with these grandparents. And so the grandma is like having her cook in the kitchen. She's like, hey, can you prepare this soup? And she's like, well, how do I cut the carrots? I can't remember exactly what it was, but something like, how do I cut the carrots? Oh, you'll figure it out. There's a knife over there. Anyway, it was just like, but that was like how the whole thing went. And I remember it being so instructive to me because I think it helped me realize like, oh, cooking is not an emergency. Like it actually doesn't matter, right? Like none of this is an emergency. It is so much more valuable. And in the story, it was so, it was one of those really good stories for kids and parents, but it was just so instructive of like, wow, if I keep crippling my kids by always jumping in and telling them exactly what to do and how to do it and when to do it, they don't ever take ownership over the situation and they don't have joy and they don't feel like they're part of something and they don't feel like they are accomplishing anything. And so
Exactly.
anyway, I just thought that just reminded, as you were telling me that story, it reminded me of that book that really,
Yeah.
yeah, it was impactful.
That's exactly what it is that the kids then say, I mean, there's studies about this. They then feel like I'm not good enough. I can't do anything without mom. And so then where does that leave? That means that they don't even try. And so now we have kids that don't have any confidence. Well, it's because they've never been allowed to do anything to build that confidence. All right. And so if we keep taking away, but I think what you said is really critical is like, wait, cooking is not an emergency. Like if we get dinner on the table an hour later, like that's okay. And sometimes we feel like it's not okay. And we have to take that step and remind ourselves,
Or you
no,
just intentionally
like
start an
this is
hour
okay.
earlier if
Or
it's not
yeah, well,
okay.
that would be a
Yeah.
good idea too. But
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't
so
mean to
yeah,
cut you
those
off,
are,
but yeah.
no, that's it. That's anyway, so that's kind of principle number two is this idea of letting them discover rather than giving them directions. So I'll give you another example. I told you we're studying biology this year, and I have a daughter that is not liking our biology unit study. She's just not, which is um so we're studying the body, and our curriculum says, okay, well, here we're gonna, and this is a fun activity, but you trace the kids' body on a big piece of paper, and then we make the different parts that go in it. So then we made like eggshell spine, and we made like we got some bags and some straws for their digestive system, whatever, right? And so we're going through this, and she's doing it begrudgingly, but she's not interested. Well, the DI the other day, I found a replica of a human body, like kind of like a puzzle thing, but like a 3D one where you take out the heart and you can take out the muscles or whatever, put the skeleton together. And anyway, I just had that sitting in the living room. This is my little builder. And the other day I saw her putting it together. And all of a sudden I was like, like you don't want to be told what to do, but you will spend a whole bunch of time building this yourself. Like I see what I need to do, right? And there's kids like that. And but I mean, in some ways that's all of us, right? Like if you think about, what made you get into what you do, this is for everyone listening, like what gets you excited? It's because it's something that you can do on your own. It's because it's something that you give value to. And that's the best gift we can give our kids, is letting them discover and find the ways that they can add value to this world.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting is like I think about my education and I moved around 10 times and I think a lot of moms in the homeschooling space get really stressed out of like, well, how do you know if you're doing enough or well, how is it you know if it's good enough for public school? And I'm like, look, I went to 10 schools. I have no idea what I did in any of those, right? Every day I went and I followed the directions and I can't tell you very much about that experience, right? Like there's very little. I feel like it's a low bar. I have a low bar to jump over here. Obviously I don't want to just hit the low bar, but I think it just goes to we have a whole education system built on do this, then do this, then do this. And if you're a kid that can just follow the directions and check the boxes, you're going to get a great grade. But that doesn't mean you learned anything. And so I think even just that, like observing, of course, she's engaged in that because, like you're saying, it's following these principles of like she owns it. She's the hero. She's discovering. So where does that take us to get to principle number 3?
And so this idea of like you want them to discover, you don't want them to tell them what to do, right? That means that failure needs to be an option and you need to let them fail. So those are kind of all the principles of number 2. So the question that kind of naturally comes up is like, okay, if I want them to do it, but what if they're really not figuring it out, right? Like what do you do if they're really just not getting it? And so then where that leads us is to this idea of you need to take smaller steps. So one of my favorite board games is it's called Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. My kids love this game. And in this game, you open it up and there's 7 different boxes inside for each year that Harry goes to school, right? And you open up box number 1, year 1, and it has a bunch of cards and you explain the rules and it teaches you, basically it just teaches you how to play this game. It's very basic, very simple. You're done in like 20, 30 minutes as you defeat the Death Eaters. So then you open up level 2 and you open up year 2. And as you open up year 2, it makes it a little bit more complicated. It teaches you a few more rules. And then you open up year 3 and now all of a sudden it becomes a real game, right? And by the time you're up to year 7, it's a 2-hour long, very complicated game. There's no way in the world that you could have jumped right into year 7. Well, I mean, people who've played lots of games maybe could, but this is meant for anyone who loves Harry Potter to pull off and be introduced into the world of board games, right? but you have the super complicated game that you've built up to little by little, and it's not such a big deal. So in education, we call this scaffolding. So if there's a problem that's too big that you can't do it on your own, then you have to break it up into smaller steps, right? And that's kind of a natural, we kind of understand that, but we don't always do it, right? So I'll give you an example. Well, so that's principle 3 is just this, you split it up into smaller steps towards mastery. And so an example of that would be, I have a daughter we're taking this writing class, and she needed to write an essay about Antarctica. She's in 4th grade. And it gave her some pages to look through, and she was supposed to mark things she wanted to include on this essay. So there's more information in the papers that she's reading. She's learning how to condense it into a smaller essay that also follows coherent logical sense. So she's looking at this papers. She's made an outline. Actually, they teach her how to make an outline. So she's made her own outline. And so now she just needs to take her outline and she needs to turn it into a paper. And she just was throwing a fit. Like, she just did not want to do it. This was too hard, like just not interested. And I went to her and I says, does this feel a little bit big? She's like, yeah, I can't do all of this. And me in my mind, I says, okay, there's 2 goals here with writing the paper. One is learning how to communicate, right? And how to take an idea and communicate it, right? So if I were to try to contact you or tell you something, I could send you a big long text, or I could send you a Marco Polo. And if I'm trying to tell you 3 paragraphs worth of information, a Marco Polo would be a whole lot easier than trying to text it to you. So this is what's going through my mind. So with this daughter, is like, okay, she needs to learn how to communicate these ideas. And then she does also need to learn the mechanics of writing and capitalization and correct spelling and good grammar. And then we're also trying to include, like, how do you add some stronger verbs and make it a more interesting essay? But those are 2 different things that we're practicing. And so I told her, I says, you know what, sweetie, I will let you tell me the essay. Use your outline and you tell it to me, and I'll write it down myself. And so I wrote down her rough draft as she's telling it to me. And then I gave it back to her and says, okay, so here's exactly what you said. I want you to now go edit it and add in some ly adverbs, add in some stronger verbs. And then you need to rewrite all of it into a final draft that looks really nice. And so we were able to take that idea that was so big and overwhelming for her and break it up into smaller chunks so that she still was learning and practicing all of those things she needs to practice, but in a less overwhelming way. So that's principle number 3, is this idea of taking something big and then breaking it up into smaller steps so that you can figure out how to get there so it's not so overwhelming.
I think that's a fantastic example. And like, whether you're homeschooling or helping with kids with homework, like, I think we can all relate to either coming and charging and doing it for them all the way, or yelling at them to just work harder, whatever, like somewhere in between.
How does it write a paragraph?
Yeah, exactly. And so slowing down to take time to figure out what the problem is, right? And how to help them bridge that gap. I think so. I think that puts us in an interesting role of, like, we're mentors now, right? Like, think of ourselves as mentors as opposed to make sure that the kids get things done the right way. Or I don't know what you would label that.
Well, I think that's a great way to put it, right? It's, it's kind of like Dumbledore watching Harry screw all this up, but every once in a while saying, hey, think about this or go do this. But, it's not like Snape who's like getting after him for every little thing that he does wrong, or whatever else. But I think you're exactly right. Like, we are the mentors. We're not. And I think sometimes we feel like, no, these kids are a reflection of me. So if they're not doing what they're supposed to, then that means that I'm failing, right? That means that I'm not a good enough mother. And that's, that can be hard. And I think that's a real feeling lots of us have. And so trying to decouple that a little bit and say, no, my role is not to make sure that you're perfect. My role is to help you give you the tools necessary to become into a competent, capable, lovely human being, right?
Yeah. Can you give an example of, like, because we all have kids that we're trying to help with the housework. Can you give an example of how you help your kids be the hero of their own story, discover things, and scaffold?
Yeah. So I've kind of given lots of them throughout. I'm trying to think of another good one.
Or maybe there's another domain. I'm trying to think, like, what's something that we all deal with on a regular basis? I think homework is one. That was a great example.
Yeah. I mean, cleaning's another great one. I'm trying to think, like, I'm still trying to figure out the cleaning bit, right? Like, well, so here's an example we're at right now, because my kids' rooms are a disaster. So it's not like we've solved this problem, but I did the other day rather than, so I have a kid. So yeah, the rooms are a little bit of a disaster. And I have found myself keep telling them, okay, I'll go in, I'll help you clean it. And I just throw stuff away or tell them that they need to throw stuff away. Right. And then they get really mad. No, I don't want to throw that away. I can't throw all this away. And my approach right now that I'm going to try and that I've tried and we haven't quite mastered it, but what we're working through is, okay, rather than me telling you what to do, here's the principle. Like we want a clean room and the fact, or at least a room that can be cleaned easily, right? And the fact that your room can't be cleaned easily and that it's always a mess. And even when we go send you to clean it, you end up spending all of your time organizing and then your floor is still a disaster. Like that means that this is too big, right? That means that you can't handle this. And so the principle then is I need you to understand, like our goal, yours, we're on the same team. Our goal is to create a room that you can manage. And so that might mean getting rid of some stuff. And so all of a sudden my daughter's like, oh, she got rid of, well, maybe not as much as I would have liked, way more than she ever has in the past on her own, right? Like, so that's an example of like, okay,
Hey, can I
here's the
piggyback
goal.
on that? Because
Yeah, go ahead.
we're on the same journey. Our kids are the same age.
Yep.
So I would say backing it up, I've got kids that are so sentimental, like jars of teeny tiny tissues that they have fallen in love with from the age of 2, level of sentimental. Okay. So
Okay.
we had to really scaffold this over the last decade to help that, like some of these kids of mine learn to manage things. And so at first I just focused on my house and my stuff and very loudly and talked through what I was thinking. Oh, this is fun to use, but I don't really need it anymore. Oh, I haven't touched this in a while. I'm going to let this go. Wow, I've really worn out these shoes. I really like these shoes. Let's take a picture and throw them away. And like just really
Okay.
overtly
Yeah.
and obviously describe my
Mhm.
thought process as we're doing our entire house. And then when I went into my kids' bedrooms, I told them I will not, because I had kids, as soon as I picked something up, no, it's my favorite thing. I said, I will never throw something away that you say I don't want to throw away. I will let you choose. And so over time, I had to sit there and what about this piece of paper? Actually, my husband did say if it's less than 3 inches, it's automatically garbage. Doesn't matter what the material type is. Because at first we were saving all of the garbage, the candy wrappers, the fabric scraps, the little tissue papers, everything. So that we did set a boundary. So then once it's more than 3 inches, say, okay, what about this? What about this? And very slowly, at first they would keep everything or most things, but we have scaffolded this so long that for the last probably 6 to 9 months, my daughter's been getting really good, my oldest, as I sit there and I hold it up, but she'll throw a lot of stuff away. And I recently just went and I set the expectation, okay, I am cutting off all project supplies, which for Jackson's is like saying you don't get to breathe air anymore. Hold your breath. And they've got project supplies waiting for them, like in our house, and it's killing them. And I said, you get no more project supplies until your room has been excavated. And so because it's projects, we don't have toys. Like you watch typical decluttering stuff and it doesn't apply to us. It's projects that they have made. They have made amazing masterpieces, right? So how do you give that up? So they have gone through, and again, at first I helped them, but then when they're like, Mom, can we declutter now? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I gotta go do something else. So my daughter went and threw an entire bag of stuff away completely on her own, like almost everything, including projects she made, and cleared off her entire desk space. And we're like 2 weeks into this, maybe a week. No, we're just over a week into it. And they've thrown away 10 bags of things from their rooms, which
That's
again,
amazing.
those are things that they've made. And they're starting to do it more on their own. And so I feel like I'm just seeing that light of, did we have to take the very slow, long route to get here? Yes, but now they're owning it. And what's so fun is that it's like a life skill that they have now that they're going to need because they're very creative people. And we're going to bless their roommates at college and beyond that they know how to do
Future
this now.
spouses and their kids and
Yeah,
all of it. No, I
exactly.
think that's a beautiful example because I mean, I'm behind you in this regard because we've moved 8 times or
Yes.
six times in the last 4 years. And so I've done most of the decluttering myself. It's just like, I mean, we can't, we're moving.
Yes.
And so I've done lots of it for them and they haven't discovered. So I'm now having to take a step back and be like, okay, now I need you to learn to do this because I've been doing it for you. It's time for you to learn it. And so yeah, we're not quite there, but that's how I'm approaching it is like, okay, here's the goal. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. I'm going to let you figure it out. I'm going to let you be the hero. Here's, I'm gonna let you discover what you use and what you don't. I'm gonna let you spend however many days you need to on this. But here's how I would break it up. I'd start with, stuff on the floor, or I'd start with your clothes.
Yeah.
Let's go through your clothes. You break it up so that it's not so overwhelming for them.
Well, what I think is really fun is like, okay, for everyone listening, I think my first invitation here would be start identifying where you're already doing this, right? Like you and I were already doing this naturally in some areas of our life. And then where can we be more intentional with doing
Yep.
it also, right? Because I don't think one of the things you and I mentioned before is you told me this framework initially, just on a casual conversation, probably a month or two ago. I was like, I feel stressed right now. I have a lot of children. We can't have everything be hero and discovery. Like that's a lot to
Yeah.
manage, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes I really do just need to tell them what to do and they need to do it right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think and you said yes, right? We agree on that. But I think that there are like when things need to be learned deeply, this is a really great process for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the point. Is you're right. This can't be everything because that's not reasonable. That's not over. I mean, that's too overwhelming. That's in some ways that's part of why being a mom is so overwhelming is because now all of a sudden the problems are on us, and so we don't necessarily want like that becomes overwhelming for your child if they're trying to figure out everything at the same time. So that's not reasonable for them. It's not reasonable for you. Like sometimes you do have to speed up the process, but I think like you said, it's a helpful framework to have for when you're ready to actually learn something and internalize it. Because I think that's what it does is it helps them become the problem solvers and it helps them internalize something. Like, and so like if that's what you want is for them, if you care about the job being done, then yeah, tell them or do it yourself. But if you're at the point where it's like, okay, the job being done is maybe less important than you becoming someone who can do this job, that's when you kind of use this framework.
Yeah, and I would say job applies to any skill, or even
Yes.
also like your daughter. Wow, she hates science. No, she doesn't. She just hates following boring directions and playing with eggshells. Like she would much rather really understand the body and figure it out her own, right? Like that's another helpful tool in your toolbox to figure out how to support
Yep.
your kids.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, as we're wrapping up, Linsey, I would love for you to share with everybody some of the things that you've created for kids that you have used and built these principles into, because I am a lover of all things that you create.
Yeah. So, um, well, yeah, let me show you. Well, how about I just show you one? Well, do you want me to show you multiple or just one or
Yeah,
kind of?
well, let's just talk about it. Just talk about it. Tell
Just
me
talk
about
about
like
it.
the Circuit Whiz kits first.
Yeah, so the Circuit Whiz kits, I have it here with me because these are my favorite one. I'm going to be honest. If this is like out of all the things I've made, and I've made a whole bunch, this one's my favorite. So the Circuit kit uses all of these ideas because the problem I have, and I kind of hinted at this beginning, is that oftentimes when you do a science experiment, they tell you exactly what to do and then you follow it, and the kids can't then go do it on their own. So this takes that idea and it throws it on its head and it says, no, kids are actually want to learn how this works. And so you open it up and inside there's just a whole bunch of black bags. And they're labeled with different levels on it. And so you open up level 1, and in level 1, you get a light bulb and you get some batteries and you get a couple wires. And then you're given the challenge or the question, can you make the light bulb light up? And so I'll go and do this like at craft fairs or whatever, and I'll have the pieces there that the kids can play with. And I'll be like, here, can you make it light up? And the kids, they'll be like, at first they look at that and they say, I don't know what to do. And then I'm like, well, just try. Like what? There's only so many things you can do with some wires and a light bulb, right? And a battery. And eventually they clip the wires to the batteries and then they clip it to the light bulb. And then the moment that light comes on, their face lights up and they're like, they just are so excited with what they accomplished. And so then in the circuit kit, you open up level 2, and in level 2, you get some more wires and it says, okay, what kind of things does electricity travel through? And then the kids get a chance to see, or they get a bunch of different household objects and they say, okay, that doesn't travel through this octopus. No, that doesn't travel through the pen. What about this paper clip? Will it travel through the paper clip? Yeah, it travels through the paper clip. Look, it'll travel through this screwdriver. I'm just grabbing whatever I have on the table here.
Yeah.
But as kids figure that out, like they get really excited. And so it just kind of builds up and slowly level by level through challenges. Never do I tell them what to do. But I give them questions to answer, problems to solve. And as they problem solve, by the end of the 15 levels, they've used motors, they've used resistors, they know a whole bunch about circuits. And the kids get genuinely excited because look at what they did, right? I had someone who I hadn't met before. She bought my kit. She messaged me and she says, "Hey, my kids have loved it. They want to wire up their dollhouse, put some lights and switches in their dollhouse. Like, where do you get these pieces so that they can do that?" Right? Like they now have the tools to do that. So that's kind of how I use it there. So this is my most recent creation that uses all those principles in a very um
Like intentional
specific
way.
way, intentional way. Yeah.
Yeah. And where can people find that? And you and your other resources?
Yeah. So me and my other resources in those, you can find us at covalentmoments.com, COVALENT. Covalent is from covalent bonding. I won't get into the details of why we chose it, but it's an intentional name. But covalentmoments.com, Covalent Moments on Facebook. We have an Etsy site, actually. Covalent Moments on Etsy are kind of the different ways. Circuit Whiz, if that's easier to remember, Google Circuit Whiz on Etsy, or on our website.
Well, I'll have links. I'll link to everything. You don't have to remember
You'll link it. Perfect. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's the best place. I'm still growing my online thing right now. I mean, like I said, I homeschool. I'm way more interested in creating than I am in selling, but I'm trying to be diligent about doing both. So there's things there. And then if you reach out to me via email or Facebook or whatever, then there's more things that I can offer that's not offered online because I'm always making things. So that's you get to trial all of our stuff before we send it on.
Yeah, and my kids love it. 10 out of 10. Everything that we have used has been amazing. And we've used them a lot with like in our homeschooling community and our friends. And like on rainy, cold days, I'll be like, "Hey, come over, we're gonna do an escape room." And kids just love it. So
they're
really,
fun.
really fun.
The other one that I have that I think is really fun is just a logic puzzle book that we take on car trips, or that we'll do at dinner time. We'll just open it up, or at the doctor's office whenever you're waiting, and it just has different questions that kids can be thinking about and solving. And like that's kind of a really fun way to just get them engaged in something. So the problem solving book we really love.
Oh, and that one I love, like kind of meta when we start to have problems with like, I feel like our kitchen table behavior's out of control at dinner and the kids are kind of ruling the conversation and Andrew and I have lost it and we're too tired to like be fun with them. We can pull out like the logic puzzle book and then it kind of reins it back in and all of a sudden we're having a family conversation and it didn't take a lot out of Andrew and I to like be cool again. And we didn't have to do like
great story.
any more rounds of telephone while we're trying to eat. Like, just lovely problem solving. Well, Linsey, thank you so much for spending the hour with me and sharing these principles with us that we can all apply in our own homes to just be, I don't know, I feel more empowered with how we're helping and engaging our kids.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to talk about it always. It's kind of a fun idea. Fun, like you said, kind of empowering when you realize, no, I have things that I can control and here's some things I can do to help solve these problems in our home. So.
Where you are planted, watch the blossoms grow.